Danny Briere spoke today.
Sure
Danny
did.
Briere spoke to the press. We're 8 days out from the 2024 NHL entry draft. Flyers currently picking at 12 and let's call it 31.
31 and a half.
He said 32 today. Danny did, and I was like, he's preparing for the inevitable. But there was a lot of information in there. Honestly, my favorite part, we'll get to it, is the face he made when Mishkov came up. He knows something. Telling you, he knows something.
You're reading.
Yeah, it's that time of year, man. That's what we do. But we're going to start with just the draft itself, where all the rumors come out. Yesterday, Danny was funny, saying, like, it's been pretty quiet, and I guess something came up, and now all of a sudden I have all this work to do. You freaked out half the league. That was pretty funny. Like, everyone's calling me, like, so what are you doing?
Hey, blame Travis Yost. He's the one who started it.
Blame Travis Yost. But I just wanted to, one of the first things he talked about, we've been discussing for 2 months now, the lack of predictability in this draft, because there seems to be obviously the consensus at 1. And Danny kind of said, like, yeah, okay, let's call it 2 through 5.
Yeah, he basically said
it could be any order.
2, 3, 4, 5. So you're thinking guys like the guys that come to mind immediately. He's assuming Lev Shinov isn't going to get past 5. He's probably assuming that Salayev isn't going to get past 5. There's been a lot of talk about Caden Lidstrom not getting past 5, and then Demidov. So you're figuring that he's looking at those 4 probably as guys who most likely it would take a lot for them to get to 12. Everyone else appears very much to be on the table.
And that's where I kind of wanted to start here. And he didn't say, like, yes, we are trading for pick 7. It is happening. Like, that's not what he said.
Of course not.
No, that would be silly. He said, we're looking to move up. We might need to move back, but it has to make sense. Everything is on the table for us. We're not stuck in one mode of trying to move up or move back. And just playing off of the rumors from yesterday. Now, this is going to take some of what he said and then some conjecture, because that's what we're going to do today. Like, if there's not a lot of predictability in the draft, does it make sense to trade up prior to, like, the pick you want actually happening? Like, we're looking to trade up to 7. Let's say that's what they're... Why? If you have no idea who's going to be there, because there is no predictability. Like, oh, we want Yaka. Yeah, he went 4. Like, all right, well, what did you give up to trade up? Does that, like, what did you take from that whole conversation, plus the stuff that may or may not be true from yesterday?
It's a reasonable point. That said, there would be an incentive for you to make the trade early if you are going to make the trade. And the incentive is simple. Yes, you don't know who's going to be there at 7 now, but also you don't know who's going to be there at 7 now. Like, if Demidov slips to 7, then suddenly if you try to make that trade at the draft, it might cost more. Because that pick is more valuable because you know what it is.
You're trading for a guy.
Right.
It's the same as, like, if that player was, or you're trading for a roster player, like, there's an actual value to this. You want this dude, not you want this asset.
Yes.
That may or may not be worth something.
But I mean, the flip side is theoretically it could be cheaper if it turns out that the draft goes chalk and there's nobody really there. But if the Flyers, in theory, were looking to trade up to 7, and going by what Danny said today about his theory that, like, 2, 3, 4, 5, fairly predictable, at least in terms of who they are.
Yeah.
Maybe not who's going to take which player.
It's going to be those guys.
But the guys. Maybe if you're Danny and you're thinking, well, after that top 5, we have 3 guys who we think are on the level of those guys in the top 5. Do we cross our fingers and hope that one of those 3 gets to 12? Or do we trade up to 7 and guarantee we're going to get one of them?
I very much appreciate Danny, the way he speaks when he talks about things like this. And it was very much on display today, where he's like, we might get the same player at 12 as if we traded back to 15. Like, that's the way we've been talking about this draft.
Yes.
Because the prospect, like, listen, you have your biases, you trust your scouts, but it's like this level of prospect, let's call it an even B. We think there's 4 guys who might be in this, and they're all Bs. Well, yeah, it would make sense to move back, get more assets, and draft the same level of player. I really appreciated him kind of speaking the way we do and not doing the, well, everyone's there. Like, no, when you're grading prospects, you can only know so much. You have to just trust your evaluation.
There were interesting tidbits. Like Danny obviously was keeping his cards close to the chest. Of course he is. He's a general manager. He doesn't want other teams to know too much. But there were a lot of interesting little tidbits that were thrown in. One that I found legitimately interesting, and it was actually in the very beginning of the presser, and it might have like slipped by some people. I feel like the general consensus in the public sphere is that so you have Celebrini at 1, and then you have like 2 to 14 or maybe 15 are in that second tier where everybody's kind of in a blob. Danny, interestingly enough, when he was talking about that tier, he basically, this is the quote, there's a lot of good players, especially in the top probably 16 or 17 in the draft. That's interesting to me because that tells me that maybe, I'm viewing the cutoff to be 14. That's where the elite guys, the guys with that type of elite prospect potential, that's where it stops. Sounds like they might have maybe 2 or 3 more that they view on that level. It's interesting.
Because I noted the same thing, the number that he gave was a little higher than what we've
higher than the consensus
than we've been estimating.
Yeah. So there appears to be maybe, unless he's just throwing up an intentional smokescreen.
Sure.
There appears to be maybe 2 or 3 guys that the general consensus does not view to be like high-end prospects that the Flyers view to be high-end prospects. And that actually opens the door maybe a little bit to the possibility of a trade down because, hey, if you think like, and I'm just throwing out a name.
Please
like,
no.
Let's say the Flyers view Adam Jiricek to be because he's a guy I did the prospect profile on him yesterday within our video series. If the Flyers view him to be on the level of, Carter Yakimchuk, Lev Shunov, Salayev, if they view him as part of that group, and you can get him at 17 and trade down and pick up an early second or a first for next year or 2 years down the road, something like that, maybe you consider it. Maybe you get an overpay and you still get a guy who you view to be a high-end prospect. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I'm just saying that little tidbit he threw in there, it opened the door a little bit to, I wonder if maybe they would consider trading down to not out of the first round, but down 4 or 5 picks because they think they can still get a high-end guy and pick up more assets.
That makes sense. When he said that, initial thought was Trevor Connolly's on their board. That's what I like.
I would be surprised, but you know what? I'm not saying I'm definitely ruling it out, but based on what the Flyers have prioritized in the past and how much they're focused on culture, I just would be surprised if he's a guy that they are targeting. But you're not wrong in terms of pure talent. He is a guy who, talent-wise, probably should be in that top group. Just at least at the back end of that top group.
You make a good point about the culture and everything. Like the point we make about the Eagles, it's like you can take the risk because it's established.
Yes.
And the Flyers, while they value it highly, I'm not so much convinced the culture just isn't. Everyone's terrified of the coach. Fair. And as soon as okay, we're gonna lose some veterans. Let's say they trade to Scott Lawton. What's the culture now? And if that's the case, would they be willing to take that risk? It was just the first thing that I thought.
That's fair.
Because as you noted, the number was 2 or 3 guys higher than the general estimate has been.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
okay, a little eyebrow
who's the guy? Who would fit into that? And I'm thinking, okay, the guy who might be good enough, as good or better than some of these other dudes, but as we've noted, character concerns.
Yes. Well, the flip side of that too, and this is, because trading down is not exciting for fans. They hate the idea.
Howie does it, and it's genius.
Yeah. Well, because Howie has built up the credibility that he can do whatever the hell he wants in the draft.
If Briere does it, there's going to be some haters, man.
I mean,
there's going to be a lot of haters.
Of course, because if you do it, you're probably going out on a limb and saying that, I don't know, a Jiricek, an EJ Emery, a Michael Hayes is just as good as Constellanius, as Carter Yakimchuk. He might be right. In the moment, people are going to be critical. But the flip side of it, and this will be the more exciting idea for Flyers fans, is, okay, let's say the Flyers have 17 guys or 16 guys, not including Celebrini, that they view as in that second tier of high-end prospects. The general consensus is that there's probably only about 13 or 14. If the Flyers were to stay at 12 or whatever, make that pick, And then one of those three guys starts falling a little bit. They fall to 22, 23, 24. Do the Flyers say, hey, this is a guy who on our board is 13. We maybe trade up out of that 31, 32 slot and get him at 23, 24.
And I've always...
That's the exciting flip side
That's the exciting part. And that's kind of always... Like on our wish list show, I said 2 top 15 picks. Now, if their thing is there's 17 guys, like, all right, whatever.
Right.
But that always seemed like the path of least resistance to me. Like, yeah, I guess 32 in Lawton could get you 11. I don't know. Like, I don't know the trade value board or anything. Yeah. But, like, 32 and Lawton probably get you 17,
or even 32. And if you go 30,
or
if you go 32
36.
32 in the Columbus pick,
yeah,
and you say, okay, that gets me from 32 to 24.
Since
they might,
yeah, just trying to think of the assets they have. Like, yeah, maybe that's what it takes, and cool.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned the Columbus pick, it came up a little later, but
yeah,
very funny again. He's like, do you guys know anything?
Yeah.
Like,
can he tell me anything?
And it was basically...
Old Donnie ain't giving me shit.
It's basically what we said yesterday. Like, their GM just got there.
Yeah.
They, by rule, he said, and up until an hour after the first round ends, I think is what he said.
That's what he said, yes.
God damn it. We're never going to know about this. And he's like, yeah, it would help us strategically because if we're drafting at 31, 32, whatever... And then we have another pick coming up to start round 2, like pick 4 of round 2.
Yeah.
Like, it could change what you do strategically.
It could. It could change who you pick at 32.
Yes.
Like, because you're thinking to yourself,
we're going to get this guy and this guy.
Yes.
Okay, which one do we prioritize more? Is he going to be there?
Exactly.
And we need to get this guy now at 32. Can we wait at 36? If you don't have 36 and you have to wait till 51.
He's not going to be there at 51. Yeah, so if we really like him, we better we maybe should reach a little at 32 because we really like this guy. Yeah, he might be there at 36. He ain't going to be there at 51. And if our scouts are saying this guy's a stud, screw it, pick him.
No, so I thought that was really good way of not telling, like, he doesn't know, but he's able to tell you, like, yeah, no, we are preparing as if we have 36, but we're not going to know until we make 32, maybe.
I would like to think that, because, I mean, hockey is such a everybody is buddies kind of thing, and you have Jonesy in the organization where, like, this is literally one of his jobs is to, like, get information because everybody thinks he's the greatest dude in the world.
Yeah.
Like, I would have to think, and I have to hope that the Flyers, by the time we get to maybe the second half of the first round, they'll at least have an inkling somehow, whether Don Waddell straight up texts Danny and is like, hey, we're keeping the pick, or if they just are starting to hear things in the organization, that they'll at least have an inkling of what direction Columbus is going. I'd hope that that's something the Flyers will be able to figure out before they make the pick at 32.
It would be nice
31.
to know that, like, before the actual having to. I think you put it in online, then you go up and announce now is the way it goes. But, like, it would be nice before they check that box, to know who it's going to be. Your question about best player available, I thought was good, just to all right. We know you need centers.
Everybody knows you need centers.
This is no secret. They say it all the time.
Yeah.
This is like much like we're not a Stanley Cup contender yet. That's not me saying that. It's them. Like, we
talked about it last week, 2 weeks ago, where it was possibly your best center prospect in the organization is Owen McLaughlin, who, like, was a 7th round pick.
Might not be a real guy. Who's to say?
I mean, he grew up in Phoenix.
That does not give me much confidence. No, but I just thought that was like him saying, like, yes, obviously we know this, but the draft philosophy question came up later. That was you as well, where it was like,
right,
we focus. It's more best player available early. You're just trying to get that talent. And then later, it's like, you know what we need is a defenseman that we think can run a power play one day. It's like, all right, well, of these guys, who do we think that is?
Yeah.
It's more in the later rounds they focus on organizational need.
So the problem with that, though, and I don't doubt that is the way they look at it, 100%. And it's a fair way to look at it. Like, hey, we need some size on the back end. So in the 5th round, let's draft a big physical defenseman who's there and see if we can develop him. The problem with that strategy, especially in relation to the issue with their lack of centers in the organization, centers don't last in the draft. Like most of the guys who have center potential, even guys who are like, he might be a 4C, a really good 4C, like they don't last past like round 4. Like Cole Knuble is a plausible center prospect. They took him in round 4, and that's about like the latest round you're going to have a chance of getting a center. And this is a guy who got passed over by everybody the year before.
Yeah.
And he still went in round 4 because he could be an NHL center, even if his ceiling is 4C. Like, you're not going to get guys with legitimate center potential.
Top 6 center potential.
Definitely not top 6, but even middle 6.
NHL,
once you get past the 3rd round. And you're just not going to.
And I always look at
you can find wingers, but not centers.
Guys with that center potential, I always look at that as like, that makes sense. It's like a shortstop or the center fielder. Like, yeah, the best player plays the toughest position. Yeah. Even if it might not even translate to the NHL, it's like that's where they play because they're the most talented, and you would assume the most talented guys go early. Like, that's just kind of a one-for-one sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that, like, if their plan is to address...
Fill the center need in the 5th round, it ain't going to work.
There aren't going to be any centers. No. They're just not.
We all silly like the mayor.